Thank you so much for having me. Seek and you shall find. Show of hands. Who is, and you can only raise your hand if your manager is not sitting next to you, obviously. Who's seeking for a new opportunity in product management? Got one? Just the others, obviously, they're just with their managers, right? Or they don't want to tell. Who is looking to hire? Ooh, that's quite a lot of you, because that's what we're going to talk about. Actually, let me start with some good news here, is that there is a lot of opportunity for product people looking to find a role. It's great. The market is booming. Everyone tells me it's strong. So it's great. At the same time, I speak to a lot of people who are looking for jobs and are actually feeling quite overwhelmed. They don't know what's the right opportunity for them. They don't know how to prepare for interviews. They're not quite clear what all these jobs mean. So there's still a lot of confusion. And we're going to talk today about how, as a candidate looking for your next opportunity, you can get a lot more confidence about how to best go about seeking the right opportunity in product management for you. A bit more good news for those of you who just raised your hand looking to hire. There's plenty of product people out here in the UK. Lots of people to choose from. But at the same time, you think, well, that'd be amazing, right? I still get these sad faces when I speak to a lot of hiring managers where they say, well, I get these candidates, they're a bit rubbish, or they look great on paper, but have they even done product management? Because when they turn up, I'm not convinced. So we're going to talk about the flip side of the candidate experience, and we're going to talk a bit more about, as a hiring manager, how can you be confident that you're going about hiring talent in the right way. Let's start with the candidate perspective. So what I hear a lot is, well, I'm looking, but I'm not sure what I want for my next role as a product person. And I really encourage you to think about opportunities and problems. Think about, what problem do I want to solve? So that can be, I want to work on a B2B product. I want to work on a B2C product. I've never worked on a product that's very early stage and needs to get to market fit, or I want to see if I can get a product to really kind of increase market adoption. Whereas you might actually say, you know what, I've done the startup bits, I've done product market fit, I now want to work on optimizing a product. Or I want to serve a customer base which is currently being underserved. My point here is that I'm trying to encourage you, before you start thinking about salary and companies, really start thinking about the problem that you want to go after as a product manager, that's something that excites you, that you would like to work on. And you can then start breaking it down. You start with the problem, as I said, but you can then start looking at, okay, what kind of company do I want to work for? Do I want to work for an early stage company? Do I want to work for a more mature company? What kind of product do I want to work on? Again, I gave the example of B2B versus B2C as a very simple example. Do I want to work on a mature product, something that's early stage? But just asking these questions and starting here before you even look at a job spec or start crafting your CV helps you to be a lot more intentional, a lot more deliberate in your experience, in looking for your next opportunity as a product person. And then you can start looking at culture and remuneration. I was going to ask how many of you start looking at remuneration first, but I'm not going to ask you that. You can tell me afterwards. I typically look at culture second. That's my personal preference. Like I said, I start with the problem, look at the opportunity, and then I look at the culture. And I typically break that down in, what are the people like? Who will I be working with? Who will I be learning from? What's the diversity like? And when I think about diversity, I think about it in the broadest sense of the word, of the word, basically, where it's about gender, race, but also where people come from, what are their backgrounds. I'm always interested in safety, and I talk about psychological safety here, where it's about, can I speak up? What's the environment like? Is it very hierarchical, or is it very collaborative? And really thinking about that, because you will have to make some trade-offs, obviously, when you're looking for that next opportunity. Because once you've figured that out, again, it helps you to go after the right opportunities, but also, like Kutsai suggest here, it helps you to be a lot more intentional, a lot more on the front foot when it comes to the interview process. And you can start asking very deliberate questions, for instance, to tease out what the culture is like. And you can ask questions like, could I suggest here, what's the most recent failure that you had in terms of something that you shipped? And the way that the person at the other side of the table or the Zoom screen will answer that question will give you a really good sense of whether there's a blame culture there or how people deal with failure or learning early and often. Just as a simple example of being very deliberate in that interview process based on your criteria. Obviously, there's a remuneration part with things to think about when you look for your next opportunity. And again, you can use some of those thoughts that you have or things that you're looking for in your interview process. But even before that, I would say when you look at the job specs. Because I've broken down a lot of factors. So we looked at opportunity, we looked at remuneration, we looked at culture. But there's always going to be trade-offs, right? We're product people, so you have to think about what is important to me. And I like how Arjun breaks it down here, where he talks about, a bit like you do prioritization, right? When you work on a product, like your must-haves, your should-haves, your nice-to-haves. And the idea of having things that are absolutely non-negotiable, that's where you draw the line, is a really nice way of you being in control of the opportunities that are presented to you and being quite ruthless about what you're going to go for and what you're going to say, no, that's not for me because it's not meeting my critical expectations or needs. Because it's always going to be a balancing act, right? For instance, if you look at those 3 buckets that we talked about earlier, you can say, well, when it comes to remuneration, salary, I've got a certain number in my head. I'm not going to go below that. That's non-negotiable, for example, right? Some people say, well, if the salary is good, I don't care if they don't have a bonus or a nice equity scheme, but I'm not going to compromise on the salary. Right? Because I know what I'm worth and that's it. Same for the opportunity. You might actually not care about the problem necessarily or the type of company, but you really want to work on an interesting or sexy product. And that's non-negotiable. And finally, culture, you focus on the people. Right? And if you think about that as a trade-off, you might say, I'm going to work for a company where I'll be surrounded by really smart people. Might not be the safest environment, might be super collaborative, but the people I'm going to work with, I'm going to learn a lot from, right? I'm thinking of for that last one, I'm thinking of a company where that's the case, but I'm not going to say that on stage, but if you want to know which company I'm thinking of, I'll tell you in the break. And then the final bit, which is the interview process. So if you've done all that work, you're quite intentional, you figure out what you want, what's important to you, and then the challenge that we often have when we go to this interview process, particularly because product is such a fluid role, it's hard to prepare for interviews. And the flip side of that is that hiring managers think that we're incompetent and we feel that we're nervous and we don't know how to best tell a story when we turn up at the interview. My suggestion is to really think about your why, what, who and how, and apply that to your standard answers, to your real life scenarios that you want to bring to the table when you have an interview process or you have a conversation with a hiring manager. Typically, I find, I don't know if you agree with me, but most of the questions or scenarios that you get in these kind of product management interviews are a variation of these 3 themes. So it's about conflict and influence, trade-offs, and value, right? So have a think about when you almost have a repository of case studies from your own career, situations from your own career. For each of those, use that why, what, how, and who framework, right? Because Devaris is a good example. He will literally sit in an interview and say, take me through your process, take me through your why, what, how, and who for a real-life product that you've just shipped or a feature that you've just implemented. Right. John is another good example. I saw him, you'll see him walking around. I don't know if he's in the room today, but I saw him just now downstairs. He talks about, obviously, being able to see that you've prepared and that you've done that repository, that you've thought it through, right? He will even ask you in an interview, like, how did you prepare for this conversation today? Right? And a framework that you can use, if you find my why, what, who, and how a bit too kind of esoteric, you can use this STAR framework, which I'm sure you've come across before, but it's a nice way of thinking about what's the situation, the task, the action that you took, and the outcome, right? And I've got a quick example for you here. Right. So from a candidate's perspective, just to round that up, it's really about thinking about opportunities and problems. I'd really encourage you to start there. Think about, within that, what is absolutely non-negotiable? What are my must-haves? And then when it comes to preparing for the interview process, think about those real-life scenarios and break down your why, what, who, and how. Now let's flip things and talk about the hiring manager. And I know there's a lot of hiring managers in the room here today. So the first thing I hear a lot is, what do I need to look out for in candidates, right? Hiring managers like, not sure, I see all these great people, but they have different skills and things that they bring to the table. Again, I would say, think about the problem this role needs to solve. Forget about creating really bland job specs, right? I know what most of us do, we copy and paste job specs. Who has copied and pasted job specs before? 100%, right? You find a few things on the internet, just about, well, let's just fiddle something together. Doesn't work. Be very specific right from the get-go about what problem this role is looking to solve. If you think about your product, what stage is it at, for instance? Is it where it needs to get to market fit? Or is it actually that you need a product person who can help terminate the existing product and transition customers to a new product or feature? Similar to the candidate perspective, think about what is important to me. So I've outlined what the problem is that this particular role that I'm hiring for needs to solve. But now let's think about what I'm looking for in my candidates. And I break it down in technical and human skills, and we'll come back to that in a minute. John, again, he talks about, think about the personal attributes, for instance, that you're looking for and that are critical to this role and the problem that you're trying to solve. Maybe think about some organizations that you've had good hiring experience with before. And also look beyond the job title. I find in product management, there are so many job titles floating around there, and they all mean different things to different people. And the point that John also makes is that great product people don't necessarily have to have been in product before. They might come from marketing, they might come from content, but have a really good product mindset. Kate Leto talks about, when you talk about skills, she talks about technical and human skills. And what does that mean? Technical skills is what work is done. So that's writing user stories. It's almost like outputs, right? Creating a strategy or roadmap. But what I like about, and she's written a book about this, where she talks about human skills. How is the work done? How do you collaborate? How do you influence others? How do you deal with conflict? So I think both from a job spec perspective and an interview perspective, think about how you're going to tease out and what's important within those human skills that you're looking to hire for. And then I've added a third one here, which is about team makeup. Think about not just the role, but how does it complement a team? If you already have a team of product managers and product designers and engineers out there, how is this person, this role, going to complement the rest of the team? So Debbie talks about that. She says, look at the skill set and background of the team as a whole, and bear that in mind when you're hiring for a new person to come and join the team, right? And she also says that irrespective of where people come from, she will have some starting points, which she'll make sure that people are insights-led and customer-focused, focused on the problem, iterative and lean, but she will still look at the team makeup as a whole. Emma follows a similar approach. Again, she looks at what value have people delivered. So forget about talking about how many user stories you've written in your life or how big your team was. It's really about the value that you've delivered. And she will look at what's people's character, what's the intelligence, are they coachable, how do they gel with the rest of the team if you put them in a team. And again, if you look at those three buckets, so we talked about technical skills, human skills, and team makeup, right? Think about what is, for you as a hiring manager, what is non-negotiable, right? You might, for instance, say, I need someone who can really drive a strategy and roadmap for this role. That's absolutely critical, and I'm not going to budge on that. If I don't get that sense that a candidate can do it, it's a no, right? Or human skills. It's really important that this person will work very closely with some senior stakeholders in the organization, so therefore they need to be really good at influencing and negotiation. And if you look at the team as a whole, you can say, well, for instance, cognitive diversity is absolutely critical, right? And what I mean by that is people's background. You could say, I work in e-commerce, I have a team of 5 product managers, they all have an e-commerce background, which is not a bad thing, just to be clear, but now I want someone who comes in with a completely fresh perspective, someone who's never worked in e-commerce before, but might have worked in insurance, let's say. Right? So you can really start breaking it down that way. And the final thing is, because it's such a competitive market, because there's so many opportunities for product managers out there at the moment, as a hiring manager, you really, and as a company, you really have to stand out from the rest. And to feel more confident, you have to do your homework all the time. And what I mean by that is, you have to have your house in order, and then you have to stand out. House in order is pure hygiene, if you think about it. So it's very basic things, but basic things, as we know, often go wrong. Things like be very clear with candidates from the job spec onwards about what the expectations are of the candidate. Be even basic things like explaining to the candidate upfront what the interview process will look like, how many stages, what the timings are, so that they don't feel like they're hanging. And be very clear internally, if you enter that interview process, who's going to be consulted and can be on the interviews, and who's going to make the final decision on whether to hire a person or not. That is something that you have to keep checking, that you've got that all sorted, that you've got your house in order constantly. Then you need to make sure you stand out, so you differentiate. And ways of differentiating and really standing out from other hiring managers and companies is being very vocal and transparent about your approach to product. Share it on blogs, talk about it, develop your personal brand, right? Be out there, be part of product communities like we are here today, and build relationships and what I call proactive recruiting. So it's not like I've got a job now, wait for people to see if they respond to my job ad on LinkedIn, but I've already built up a talent pool of people I've met at events like this, or I've spoken to over a few years ago, but I've almost kept my own database of talented product people. Might not be right for now, but who knows in a year from now, right? So wrapping things up before we go into the Q&A, from a hiring manager's perspective, again, start with the problem that the role needs to solve. And within that, think about what are the absolutely critical skills that I need to hire for. And last but not least, do your homework all the time. Because for both perspectives, if you think about it from a candidate, if you think about it from a hiring manager's perspective, if you are intentional about either getting hired or hiring, you will ultimately find the right opportunity or the right talent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Oops, sorry. That was very interesting presentation. We've got a couple of questions from Slido. I'm going to start reading them here on my phone. So we've got a question. When you've interviewed people, can you give any examples of what stands out, have wowed you?
Yeah, so what stands out and has blown me away when I've interviewed people, people who come up with ideas. So they really looked at your problems. Sorry. I'd love people to look at my problems. They've really looked at your product, rather, and are in a position to come to you and say, I've looked at your product, this is what's wrong with it, or this is what I would improve. And particularly that what I would improve bit really has blown me away. So I've had candidates who would say, not only this is what's wrong with it, because yeah, that's useful, but I want to then hear a bit more. And they really, in a well-informed kind of way, say, well, I would do this based on looking at the competition, or have you looked at this product, which might be in a completely different sector? This is what I would improve. So again, what that shows me is that someone, A, they've done their homework in terms of looking at my problem, not problem again, I've got problems, clearly, looking at my product and the experience, but then going a step beyond that and doing their homework and thinking about, like a product person would do, right? What improvements would you make and come up with some well-founded kind of recommendations?
Don't you think it will be a bit risky to do such a thing, since maybe people would feel precious about their product?
No. You know, I'm a simpleton, right? If your hiring manager feels precious about your product, about you giving honest feedback, well, constructive feedback still, then that might be a warning sign that might not be the right company for you. And again, like John suggested, be your actual you, not the practice you. And the actual you is hopefully that you're saying, actually, this is what I think of your product. And it doesn't mean you have to say, well, your product is absolutely swear word. No, it's like, this is what I've noticed, these are the gaps, and this is what I'd recommend.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Not just risky, but also, especially in a B2B sense, but you might not have a way to be a customer to see the product to that extent.
So I think the question is like the learning about the product and the product experience if you're not necessarily a customer because it's a B2B product, right? I think there's still alternative ways to learn about the product. There's one method, I don't know if you've come across, it's called a sales safari. Has anyone come across a sales safari? It's nothing too exotic, but you're basically going to where those buyers of your product are, because they are in fora or they go to events, and you learn about their experiences by just listening in. So you're going on a safari, you might go to a conference if you're, let's say you work on a B2B platform for real estate agents. So you go to a conference or you look online what they say about that product, you look at customer reviews, for instance. There are even looking at comparisons between products. For instance, I work at Intercom. You go online, you can find comparisons between Zendesk and Intercom. So there's alternative ways of getting that customer learning, maybe indirectly, but still you get lots of valuable input that way.
Thank you. To the next question. If you already have a talent pool ready, why should I make the job announcement public?
I would always, still make it public, because again, you want to really give yourself the best options of seeing what's out there and seeing, meeting the people who could be the best fit for your role. Yes, you might have that bias because you've got that talent pool, and that's great. Equally, it's that classic thing, right? I worked with that person at this job before, so I'm sure they'll be great at the next job, and they could well be. And again, that's one of the key reasons why I always have my own spreadsheet of my talent pool, if you like. But you want to really open it up. You want to get new perspectives. Product evolves all the time, so you want to open it up.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, to the next question. How do you ask questions to get a sense of personality from the candidate so you can get the idea of the team culture fit?
How do you ask a question of personality? You know what I do, both in interview situations and also in real life situations, and not everyone is comfortable with it, is I do a bit of role play sometimes. Who's comfortable with role play? See, you're my man, definitely at the back. Because it's a nice way, and and it's not even about role play. I'm not going to make it too painful, but often I'll give people a situation and really say, how would you react? And I'll very quickly find out whether people just give me an answer because they think I want to hear a certain answer, or no, they'll give me an honest answer and that's authentic. And if I don't feel I get that answer the first time, I will throw in a curveball and say, okay, but the stakeholder says no. So how do you respond now? So very off the cuff, bit role play, kind of like, just to get a sense of how do people actually behave, how do they actually think.
You should, I feel like I should be a little bit of an actress.
No, but it's, because it's hard, right? We can all go, we've all been there, right? We go to interviews fully prepped, best selves, we even look the part and everything. But if you, as the question is raising, like if you want to get a real sense of what someone is actually like, you have to break through that a little bit. That's why I personally keep my interviews quite informal and stuff, so you get a real sense of what the person is like.
Thank you. What do you think the difference is when hiring someone for a startup versus a big company? Very interesting.
Interesting question. Startup, a big company. Startup, very different problem space in terms of you have to be able to do everything from fixing the kitchen sink to actually solving a customer problem through the product and getting to market fit. So you really have to, you'll probably be doubling down when you're looking for candidates on someone who's adaptable, who can just run with it, who's got an entrepreneurial sense. Whereas if you go to big corporate, again, typically the problem space is different, often focus more on optimizing, but also a key part is stakeholder management, I find, in big corporates. Someone who's really good with working out who the stakeholders are, working through red tape, which again, you obviously have less of when you hire for a startup.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a question from someone that is hiring or hired for product managers. I've always hired with a bias to human skills, 70-30, as technical skills can be taught, whereas human skills are harder to change. Do you have a preference?
I was going to give the 50-50 cop-out answer. I think one thing to think about is, because it's interesting in this question where it says, well, technical skills can be taught, but think about, do you have the capacity, or do you have the organizational capacity, or even the knowledge to teach people either skill group, I would argue, right? So that, for me, that's the question that comes before that, is like, are you in a great position to teach someone how to do a roadmap or to write user stories? So that's one thing to think about. But I do agree with the sentiment that for me, of the question, for me, it's really, I look at 4 key basic things before I do anything else. I look at curiosity, I look at creativity. Can people communicate? Can they collaborate? Those are, if you like, those are my 4 kind of non-negotiable attributes that I look for before I think about anything else. And those are all human skills.
What about the technical skills? Like, if a product manager usually comes from different backgrounds, so what is the absolute technical skills to have in order to be a successful product manager?
Yeah, you know what, I'm going to say something controversial here. I'm a bit less interested in technical skills, right? Because yes, you could be the master of roadmaps. You can have the most beautiful roadmap the world has ever seen. Do I care? Not really. Ultimately, I care about, can you deliver value to the customer? And the roadmap and that technique is a means to an end. Now, I'm being a bit flippant here just because it's early morning and I want us to be woken up and all the rest of it. Because I will look at technical skills, just to be clear. But particularly if, and that's even more important, if you need someone who can hit the ground running, so yes, then you really need to double down on technical skills because you need a roadmap right now, or you don't have a strategy for your product portfolio, so you need it right now. But I think technical skills, maybe to the sentiment of the question, I find that's the easy part, relatively speaking. The human part and the kind of product mindset, where I talk about creativity, curiosity, collaboration, communication, that's such an important part of the job. And yes, I will focus on, can you write user stories? Can you do a roadmap? Just to be clear, but it's not the crucial part in my mind.
One less thing to think about. Thank you. Last question. What's a good way to dive deeper into the way a candidate answers a question? Some people interview well, so what questions do you ask to explore deeper?
I use very short sentences, 3-letter words, and they're not rude. So I'll just ask like, why? How? Or I do my puzzled face. Or one thing I do as well is I just start a sentence and then don't finish it. And I do that quite deliberately because, I want to leave it open. I notice people are like, no, I hope I'll never be interviewed by this guy. But just to really leave it open, open-ended questions. Sometimes I'll just interrupt purely to see how people deal with me interrupting and how quickly they can change pace. This is not to catch you out, but just to get a conversation which is much more explorative, much more two-way.
Okay, so very short questions.
Why, how, what?
Big
Absolutely.
answers or short answers?
It's not, size doesn't matter here. It's not about big or short. It's really about, if you go back to my slides, it's about how you structure your question. If I can understand, and I've made this mistake many times myself, where I start talking and I like to talk. I like the sound of my own voice. But if I can structure an answer by saying, this was the problem, this is what I did, this is what this is the outcome, then it doesn't matter if it's long or short. As long as you've got those three components, that's the main thing.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for your presentation and for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.